Dr. Peter Trumbore. He's a professor and chair at the Department of Political Science over at Oakland University. We always love having all of you and members of your team with us on the MegaCast to talk politics. What an exciting time to be a political junkie.
I guess that's one way to put it. It's also anxiety raising and hair pulling, but yeah, it's a time like none other than we've seen in at least in my memory. So yeah, this is something.
And do you sit there and go, oh, it can't get worse than this, or it's not going to be this, it's not going to be this, and then every day you just wake up, you turn on, you tune into a debate, or could you even call that a debate? Is that where you want to start today?
I'll start wherever you'd like. That was not a debate. It was really the furthest thing from a debate. If by debate we mean that the candidates have an opportunity to talk about their visions for the country and to really talk about the issues that are important to voters. That's certainly not at all what happened on Tuesday night. So it wasn't a debate. It was, frankly, it was a rage-induced temper tantrum and a food fight and an embarrassment. When Joe Biden characterized it on the stump yesterday as a national embarrassment, I think he was right. It was not a shining moment.
Yeah, I don't think anyone who watched that debate, who was going in to try to make a decision on who they were actually going to vote for, came out with any definitive answer, because nothing new came out of that other than what you just said. It was an embarrassment, and I think the American people lost. And I wonder, do you think they're going to have a second debate?
I think they will. Yeah, the debate commission is going to try to create some mechanisms to help them enforce the rules that the candidates theoretically have already agreed to. I don't know if that means they're going to introduce a microphone kill switch or what they're going to do. But it was very clear that the moderator on Tuesday night, Chris Wallace, had no ability to regain control. Once control was lost, and it took just moments into the debate. Once he lost control, there was no getting it back. And so we'll have to wait and see what the debate commission comes up with in terms of finding a way to impose some kind of order on the candidates. And I guess we should be clear here. The candidate who needs to be reined in this setting is Donald Trump. That said, I mean, these debates are important. They're important not because they necessarily move voters. That typically doesn't happen as a result of debates. But they are windows into the style and the temperament and the character of the candidates, and for that reason, these things make a difference. They matter, and they matter to our process. They're part of this democratic process that we have. The one that's coming up next is also important because it's a town hall style format, which means that the questions are being posed by voters, and it's important for these two candidates to put themselves out in front of the voters and to do so side by side, so we can really see a direct comparison. So, some Democrats were saying that Biden should basically drop out of the next two debates. I don't think that's going to happen. Biden said yesterday that he has every intention of going forward with it. So we'll just have to sort of see what comes up and hope that the style changes.
And I'm wondering if going into that debate, if that was Trump's intent, because one thing that did come out of it, he got the headlines. Everyone is talking about him, good or bad. And we have to remember, he's not your typical politician. He is a reality star, a business person. So did he intend to do that? And did he get what he wanted?
Well, I think it's so if what he wanted was maximum attention on himself, which may well be, what his aim was. And I think, yeah, he got that. Was this his plan all along? Yes, it's very clear. And in fact, if you were paying attention to the stories leading up, talking about how the candidates were preparing, Trump really wasn't preparing for the debate in the way that we think about debate prep. He was telling his team that as far as he was concerned, the experience of being president was preparation enough. And he was trying out one-liners and sort of attacks on various aides and friends. It was pretty clear from the get-go that he was not interested in actually having a discussion on the issues or on his record, or even on Joe Biden's 40-plus year record in public service. What he was interested in doing was disrupting, attacking, needling, trying to get Biden to basically, play on his level. And I think Biden, to his credit, for most of those 98 minutes, because they ran over, for most of that time, I think Biden resisted the very real temptation to rise to the bait. And I think that Biden was most successful when he actually turned away from Trump and spoke directly to the American people, spoke directly into the camera. Those moments were few and far between, but I think that's when Biden was most effective. I don't think that the president was interested in much more than the spectacle. And I think we see that just in the tweets that he released, like today, either today or yesterday, talking about how great the ratings were, as if that's what it is, just a TV show. So yeah, moving forward, things are going to have to change if we're going to get much of value beyond the stark character contrast between these two candidates.
Dr. Peter Trumbore with us. He's a professor and the chair of the Department of Political Science at Oakland University, with us today on the Oakland County MegaCast. Dr. Trumbore, after that first presidential debate, we still have a vice presidential debate coming up. Definitely far different personalities on both sides of the ticket that will be participating in that debate. And you mentioned earlier on in this interview that the presidential debates don't typically have a great influence on the voting public. It's more about observing temperament and character style and character types of the candidates that are on the ticket. In terms of this vice presidential debate, with what we saw on display on Tuesday night this week, how much more important will a vice presidential debate be in seeing those personalities and those character traits of the Republican and the Democratic tickets for president?
Well, I think that the vice presidential debate next week is going to be completely different in terms of tone and style, because Kamala Harris and Mike Pence are, for the most part, they're traditional politicians. They know the rules. They know how these things operate. And Pence shares a lot of Trump's politics, but doesn't share Trump's temperament. And so I think the trick during the vice presidential debate for Mike Pence is going to be to actually do what Trump didn't have to do, and that is to defend the administration's record over the last almost 4 years now. Pence chairs the coronavirus task force, so he is going to be in a position where he is going to have to directly answer questions, both posed by the moderator and that are going to come at him from Harris. He's going to have to essentially own the administration's response to the coronavirus. And he's going to have to try to defend the president and defend the president's conduct, especially things like the president's frank refusal. Really, I think all you can do is call it a refusal to condemn, white nationalists and white supremacist groups. So Pence is going to have a really big job to do of playing cleanup for the president. I think that Harris has a much easier task. She has to do what she can to hold Pence's feet to the fire and to really make that clear contrast between what a Biden-Harris administration would look like compared to what another 4 years of Trump-Pence would look like. But again, thinking about, do these things move the needle at all? I mean, vice presidential debates matter far less even than presidential debates in terms of how the public views the races. But again, they're important because they represent the few opportunities that we get to see both camps speaking to the American people and drawing that direct contrast between themselves. And so they're important for that regard, even if they don't move voter sentiment very much.
So even with that being the case, Dr. Trumbore, in this particular election, in this particular situation with what we saw on display on Tuesday night from both candidates, will the vice presidential debate in this particular election, or this particular vice presidential debate itself, be that much more important, given that people have a bad taste left in their mouth from both parties, and for those that are not affiliated with either party after what they saw on Tuesday night?
Well, it could be, but again, like I would expect that we'll see pretty good viewership. I mean, they typically don't get the same kind of viewership that the presidential candidates get. But again, so we sort of think about the broad trajectory of how much do these things matter in the dynamics of any given presidential race. They just don't tend to shift voter attitudes. It's especially true and especially hard to do that this year, given that in this presidential cycle, the pool of truly undecided voters is much smaller than we typically see, and certainly smaller than it was in 2016. And I would also say that certainly on the Republican side, on the Trump side, the pool of soft Trump supporters who at this point could be convinced to abandon him, is also likely to be really, really small. I mean, his support has held steady at right around 40%, shifting between 40 and 43% almost for that entire 3 years. He's never cracked the 50% approval bar. But then again, his approval rarely has fallen below 40%. Meanwhile, the overall spread has been pretty much the same since about March. It's about a 7% to 8% margin in favor of Joe Biden, and that hasn't changed much. So again, I don't think a lot of movement is going to happen as a result of these debates. That said, we learn important things, and they're valuable for those reasons.
And Doctor, I have a question. We're just over 30 days away from the election, and I think the show is going to continue well past Election Day. Do you think President Trump, if he were to lose, will he actually leave office, and what could that scenario look like?
So here's the thing, right? If he loses, he will leave office. The question is, will he acknowledge that he has lost? And how far will he go to try to create, if he loses, try to create a counter narrative that people will believe? So part of the issue is that he can't do this by himself, right? Trump cannot cling to power alone. He would need to have institutional support to do it. At state levels, right? He would need to have state election officials and state legislatures who are willing to basically keep him in office by putting forward alternate groups of electors. He would have to have members of Congress, and both in the House and Senate, who would be willing to back his play. He would ultimately have to have a Supreme Court potentially that would have to back that also. So this is one of those things where he can't do it by himself. He would need a lot of others facilitating an attempt to hold power if he has in fact lost. That said, the more decisive the defeat, the harder it will be for him to spin a counter narrative. And this is something that certainly Biden has talked about, and a lot of other sort of commentators and analysts have talked about, that the bigger the margin on election day, the harder it will be to spin this counter narrative that the votes really aren't what the votes are. And so in part, right, is why we've started to hear in recent days Democrats being urged to, if you're going to vote, if your state allows you to vote early like Michigan does, to do it now so those votes get counted immediately, early on election day. If you're going to vote by mail, send that in as soon as possible so that they are all there in your clerk's office on November 3rd, and they can begin to get counted on election day. And if like me, you're not comfortable with either of those options, show up at the polls on the 3rd, wear your mask, socially distance, use your hand sanitizer. But the bottom line is the bigger the margin for either candidate on election day, the harder it will be for one of these counter narratives to be spun that could throw the process into chaos. That doesn't mean that chaos can't happen. It doesn't mean that we will go into yet more uncharted and unprecedented territory. I mean, I think Ronnie asked at the beginning of the interview, is this sort of an exciting time? And I'll tell you, it's gotten very difficult over the last 3 years to have to always answer questions in interviews like this. The first thing out of your mouth is, wow, we've never seen that before, right? the sort of the unprecedented nature of where we are in our political life right now is unprecedented. And so it's like one sort of daily outrage after another. I mean, something else is going to come up between now and October 15th, which is the next presidential debate. So, I think that the bottom line is there are all kinds of doomsday scenarios about just how bad things could get. And I think that's why it is imperative for those who are planning to vote to do it early if they can. And if they don't feel comfortable doing it that way, show up on November 3rd and fulfill your civic duty on Election Day.
Just about 2 minutes left here with you. Quickly, do you think there is actually widespread voter fraud?
No, there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud. That doesn't mean that voter fraud hasn't occurred, and there are certainly periods in American history, back in, for example, the 1850s, in which voter fraud was rampant. But no, voter fraud is not an issue in American elections. It just isn't. And certainly mail-in ballots are some of the most secure ways of voting. Secure enough that this is how our military has voted for generation. Secure enough that the president himself uses a mail-in ballot. So no, this is an absolutely false narrative that has been spun principally by the president and his allies to try to throw into question what the outcome is going to be. You don't try to delegitimize an election if you think you're going to win it. The only reason that you would do that is if you are reading the signs and are pretty sure that you're going to lose. And I think that's why Trump was spinning those arguments back in 2016. Trump himself did not expect to win, but he needed to be able to create a narrative that would protect his ego. Why didn't I win? Because the Democrats rigged the outcome, and then he won, and then he still claimed the outcome was rigged. So I'm not quite sure, how you get there.
Well, I think we're in for a crazy ride over the next month or two. And like you said, every day it's something new. So we'll have to see how this all plays out. We appreciate having you here with us on the Oakland County MegaCast. We'll definitely be checking in with you and other members of your team over the next month. Dr. Peter Trumbore with us. He is the professor and chair for the Department of Political Science over at the Oakland University. Thank you so much for your time and your insight, as always.
Thank you, Ronnie.